Conger fam, what's going on? It's Coach Ty Palms with my boy Jason Leydon. We're bringing you guys another Conquer Chat episode. Today, we're not in the same building, but we're still going to bring the same product. Some good quality stuff, educational on some good mixed modal work. If you can't hear it in my voice, I'm battling a little sickness. I think Jay is too, but bear with us if you don't mind. Jay, what's happening, bro?
What's up, my man? Tom, you just came off a very successful Wadapalooza trip, man. We had like 25 athletes down there, like 15 or 16 were you, a few were mine, a few were Ryan's. How you feeling coming off Wadapalooza?
Excited, man. Excited, especially excited for everyone because everyone did so awesome. But the RX girls were really cool getting on the podium. That was special, unique. The guys did so freaking good in that elite division. They really, I think, shocked some people. So that was cool too. I'm feeling good, man. I'm just excited.
That's awesome. Excited. Yeah. How was it down in Miami? Was it nice being in warm weather?
Yeah. Well, 2 days it downpoured and 2 days it was really hot. So you got a full dose of Florida weather. The downpouring was annoying at times. And it was super hot the other days. It was like there was no in between. But I didn't mind the hot. It sucked a little bit, but I'll take that all day over the freezing cold that's going on in New York right now. It's like 17 here.
Dude, how about playing football in that Kansas City game? Fourth coldest NFL game in the history of the NFL.
So all those dudes are rocking Vaseline all over their body.
Right. All over. I heard a story. I don't know if it was John Welborn who told it, or it was like another football guy. But it was just that where he's a rookie and they're all talking trash, saying cold weather, you can't wear an undershirt. But they didn't tell them that they were rubbing everything on their arms to keep their body heat inside.
Yep. That's the secret. That's the secret is they're all rocking Vaseline so that the pores and all that is closed. They can't get cold, which is crazy. I honestly had no idea about that for a long time.
You still have to be somewhat cold, right? I mean, that's just like, and they said it was -4 at kickoff, right? And like -22 with wind chill.
When you're on the bench, you're definitely cold. When you're on the field, you probably don't feel a fucking thing.
Until you get smacked by a 300-pound lineman.
Yeah, your hands definitely hurt.
Yeah, your bones crumble just a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, freezing friggin' cold here. Went from 85 to 90 in Miami, straight to 17 in New York with snow. Just a complete 180, which is probably why I'm not feeling my best, but all good. Today we're going to chat with you guys. We're going to chat with you guys about mixed modal work. Some questions that I get from people who are like trying to coach, like just some of my athletes, honestly, who are like, hey, like I want to write workouts for some of my friends or my gym. And like a lot of the questions is like, how do you determine like rep schemes and sets and rest between sets? And once again, this is more specifically in like a mixed modal setting, not like your traditional back squat, like 5x5 rest 2 minutes. Although those come into play, of course, when we're thinking about reps and sets, but we're really thinking mixed modal. All right. So Jay, leaving you with that kind of question, if someone asked you that, like, where would you start?
Tom, when you first said this question over, I was like, wow, this is a great question because this is something that you and I have a ton of conversations on. We go back and forth on a few things depending upon times of the year, what we see from competitions, where we think competitions are going, what we think people need to be able to do and sustain and hold. And it's a lengthy conversation. And I want to backtrack for 1 second. And for the listeners, what you have to think about is when Tommy's saying mixed modal, right? And this is something that he and I talk endless hours upon, is we're thinking about like CrossFit workouts, right? So if you're doing time or task prioritized workout, work versus rest ratio, EMOMs, I mean, however people want to structure it. But when you do multiple things, you get better at the sport of CrossFit. And Tommy, for me, when someone says, how do you determine reps versus sets inside of a workout? Everything for me comes down to the prescription. So that's how I determine it, right? And what I mean by that is if I'm trying to have somebody do an aerobic workout, and I'll kind of clarify this as I go along, and there will be some times we can elaborate on it more. But if someone's ready to train the aerobic system, and I need to build the aerobic capacity within inside of a mixed modal format. I have to get them better at transitioning well, at just movement between different modalities. Everything for me comes down to sustainability for that person based on the movements and the time domain. That's what's going to create the aerobic feeling for them. So, how do I determine reps and sets for that? Well, can the person sustain the work for how I want it, for how I want the output, and for the length of time? That determines the aerobic one, right? So, if I'm like, hey, Tommy, you're going to do a 20-minute AMRAP and you have to do 15 ring muscle ups, 21 thrusters at 135, 35 burpees, and then you got to, for 23 minutes. For some people, that can be aerobic, but you're going to be breaking it up. And if I want someone to work on their aerobic capacity, if I want someone to get good quality reps and good volume, I might say, hey, you're going to do 3 ring muscle ups, you're going to do 6 thrusters at 95 pounds, and then you're going to run 200 meters. And you can see right away how the movements and the reps prescribed drastically change the workout immensely. Where it can be more in a more controlled and continuous cyclical fashion. So when I'm thinking aerobic action, I'm thinking of cyclical action. And if you guys watch the video, I'm laughing because someone just walked behind Tommy and trying to hide, and I thought it was funny how they were ducked down.
It's Mr. Nick Bader.
Oh, Nikki Bader's in the house. So a lot of it comes down to your prescription. And I can elaborate that even further, where if we're trying to work on cyclical action, meaning I want just this monotonous, steady state, rhythmic pattern for the time domain, then the reps have to allow the person to do that, right? And the same thing applies. If I'm trying to build intensity for somebody, if I'm trying to build intensity with longer time domains, how I write the reps and the sets come down to, can this athlete, based on what the movements are, can they perform this in a fashion that allows them to express the prescription that I'm writing? And the movements have to establish that too, as well as the sets. And that also has to correspond with what their functional ceiling is. So if someone's never gone over 20 ring muscle ups and I'm prescribing a workout, whether that's an aerobic based workout or a work to rest ratio or an EMOM, no matter what the fashion is, and it has 60 ring muscle ups in it, well, that's way over their functional ceiling. And going from 20 to 60 is a huge increase. So when I'm thinking about reps and sets inside of a workout, I think, Tommy, do these reps, sets, movement patterns, do they allow the athlete to express what the prescription of the workout is? Cool. If they allow that, awesome. Does this all fit and function with inside the athlete and with inside that functional ceiling for the person of where they are and what they can express for these movements? Now, that can take you really far inside of a program, but something, I'm going to quarterback this back to you, but something that you and I had a conversation on last night is you just came back from Wadapalooza and you had not an insight, but what you saw from the elite division led you to think of something different from reps for sets in a mixed modal format for high level athletes, right?
Yeah. But what you said though, I think is nailing it in terms of just like what I always test people is like, what are you trying to do? Like that's how you determine reps and sets, like, because like you can make mixed modal about so many things. And what I mean by that is like you can look at it from an energy system standpoint and be like, yeah, that's anaerobic threshold, or that's aerobic work, but then you could also look at it from like a muscular standpoint and be like, okay, like that's core endurance or that's push endurance, pull endurance, right? Like I had an athlete today do something with toes to bar and double unders, and nothing about it was building their like aerobic capacity. Like, sure, they were breathing somewhat heavy, but what was being challenged was their toes to bar and specifically their core during that workout and the ability to sustain reps and sets. And picking those reps and sets were based upon what my athlete was capable of doing, right? Because if like the workout was part of one of their workouts, say it was 18, 16, 14 toes to bar, after every set, 60 double unders, rest 1-to-1 times 3 sets, right? And the purpose was to go unbroken, right? And there were big sets of toes to bar, and I wanted to see if they could do that on some pretty short rest with some light grip fatigue, right? And they were able to do that. And after every set, I was like, what is being challenged right now? And it was the core, right? So the reason I say that is because like if I picked 30, 25, 20 as the sets, it might have just been a big waste of time because they probably couldn't do it unbroken, and then they're standing around a lot of the time, but then maybe their cores, their grip is now being limited or whatever it might be. You just have to choose the reps and sets based on what you're trying to do. So that's the first thing. But the second thing, but yeah, what we were talking about in terms of like what these elite athletes can do now, what's where I think it's changing a little bit, and I think we saw the change probably as Frazier was kind of leaving. But these athletes now are very different than how they were 10 years ago. And we knew that, obviously, especially from like a strength perspective. But now what I'm seeing in mixed modal is that athletes can just sustain very large sets of everything and and push workouts where we used to see like maybe 10 years ago, like the first round the athlete would do it unbroken, and the second round they'd like maybe hold on, and then the third round they would just completely break down and fall apart, and the athlete who paced it extremely well ended up winning the workout, and that's what Rich did really well. Now it seems like if you start pacing the workout in the beginning, the fall off from the athlete who's pushing big sets in the beginning isn't so big that you could actually catch up. So what I mean by that, if there's a workout with 3 rounds of 25 toes to bar, the athlete's going unbroken for the first 2 rounds, and then they're going like 18-7. It's not like it's becoming 7-5-4, then like singles and completely crashing and burning. Like we're just not witnessing that anymore. So part of me feels like we need to teach athletes to be able to go really big in workouts and sustain those sets at higher intensities. And how I do that and how we do that is, there's many ways to skin a cat, but that's just what I've been thinking more so about these days.
Yeah, and I think backtracking just a little bit, excuse me, is we know when you're looking to determine reps for sets, right? You have to understand the work they prescribe. Does it allow the athlete to express your prescription? And I see a lot of coaches go wrong with this between picking movements because they think the movement looks cool, or picking a number of reps, but that pulls away from what they're trying to do, right? If you think about it, it's like saying putting somebody in a rower and saying, hey, we're going to work on aerobic capacity, but then you're trying to get the person to hold a pace where they're dying after every single set. That's not working aerobic capacity. Like if you're trying to build aerobic capacity, sustainability, repeatability with inside of a mixed modal format, and you have like 245-pound snatches and burpee bar pullovers and 44-inch box jumps, well, that's going to be working something completely different. That's not going to be sustainable, repeatable from a training perspective. So once you can understand the workload that allows the athlete to express a prescription, you then have to think of one other thing. And Tommy was talking about this, which is your fatigue limiters, right? So Tommy was talking about the total bar double under workout for his athlete. And for them, they felt the fatigue within inside the core. And that's something very important for coaches to understand, because as you're trying to formulate mixed modal workouts where you're trying to get the athlete to express a certain desire that you're putting forth in order to train them, you have to make sure that the movements aren't going to overly challenge a limiter that's going to pull them away from being able to complete the workout. And that's that kind of next step with inside mixed modal format, right? So, because if you don't understand the fatigue limiters and then you're allowing or you're prescribing these workouts, well, they might be able to do it, but like let's say they have excessive grip fatigue, and then you're doing a workout that's double unders, chest to bar pull-ups, rowing, farmer's carries, I don't know, everything that's taxing the grip. That limiter of the grip is going to limit their ability to completely express what you want them to, because their grip is going before they're able to really get into that set pattern. So we need to also keep that in mind, right? As coaches, is yes, are the movements, the reps and sets, are they formulated in a way that's giving the athlete the potential to do what I want them to do and get them to where I want them to get them? But is a combination of movements, is it done so in a way where if it is a limiter, am I formulating the workout that's still going to allow them to express the prescription with the fatigue limiter I'm trying to improve upon, or is that limiter going to take away from their ability to perform the workout? Does that all make sense, kind of?
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And that's actually like a point I was making to someone recently in terms of when they were asking me questions about it. And they like, hey, I wrote this workout, like this is what I'm trying to do. What do you think about it? And I was like, the workout I think consisted of like deadlifts and then back extensions and then another movement. And I was like, and their goal was to like make this like aerobic workout. And I was like, it could be end up being aerobic, but like when you're doing a back extension and a deadlift, you have to look at that and go like, what is really going to probably be fatiguing there? And I was like, the low back is going to be an issue pretty quickly, most likely, the posterior chain. And so like if your goal is to like do that, then that's fine. But like if you're trying to make this more aerobic, movements that don't interfere with each other is a really good way of going about it. Like handstand push up and deadlift when you do Diane, the reason that's so potent is because you could just sprint it the entire time because they don't interfere. Same thing with Fran, right? But then if you were to do, you know, pull ups and toes to bar and double unders and rowing, like you said, like the limiter is very clear as to what's going to happen there. Like your grip is just going to be smoked. So the odds of making that aerobic, maybe not the best unless you pick a rep scheme that allows your athlete to potentially do it, right?
100%. And I think that's where coaches really got to hone in on with the programming is, am I trying to, are we in a training block where I'm looking to train limiters or train specific systems with inside mixed modal formats, or just get them better at different volume accumulation with inside of mixed modal workouts? Or am I trying to test them? Right. And excuse me, if you're trying to test them, well, that's going to look a lot different than if you're trying to train them. And that's what coaches really have to be able to distinguish. And to me, like that's what separates a good coach from a great coach, is their ability to separate those two, training versus testing, their ability to formulate and write workouts inside of a training setting that's going to train them on what they want them to improve upon to get them to the next level, and then test them in a way that's going to test what you're trying to build upon and improve upon, right? And not just throw a tester out there just to throw a tester out. When all those kind of dots are connected with inside the program as it fits to that person and what they need, that's when you're going to make a lot of progress and success with inside that mixed modal world.
Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely. I guess some other things that we could just talk about really quickly is like, okay, like I get it. The listeners that's what they're saying. It's like, but just in like simplest terms and sets and reps, right? When you're writing workouts, how often are you thinking about solely a movement versus like all the movements paired together?
So just so I can make sure I understand the question, you're saying, how often am I thinking about, if I'm doing a mixed modal workout, how
Mm-hmm.
often am I thinking about just one movement, or how often am I thinking about everything paired with it?
Yeah. So like, when you're writing a workout, a lot of people will look at a workout and they'll go, oh, this workout's all about the muscle up,
Mhm.
right? Like my ability to do well in muscle ups is what's going to allow me to do this workout well. So when you're writing workouts, how often are you thinking about a sole movement versus like the pairings of the movement, for example? So like when you're writing a workout and you're thinking about sets and reps, you're like, okay, 10 ring muscle ups, 3 sets, right? Because that makes 30, just to make it very clear. Versus like how often are you thinking about all the movements inside that one round, and the pairing, and like how do you determine sets and reps, I guess?
Yeah, that's a great question. And if I were to think about that or answer that quickly, I think about the soul movement, Tommy, until I'm able to get them to where I want them to be with inside that movement from an execution standpoint. Meaning, if we keep it on the topic of ring muscle ups, and I need to get somebody better at ring muscle ups with inside a mixed modal setting, well, I then got to cycle through all the processes that I need to go through to get them there, right? And we're not going to run through that in this talk. But if all those processes and formats are set, then I'm solely thinking about the ring muscle up and non to what I'm looking for. I'm solely thinking about just the ring muscle up until they're able to execute it the way I want them to execute it. Whether that's holding big sets, whether that's holding quicker sets in short amount of time. In an ideal world. Once they're able to achieve that, then everything I'm doing, Tommy, is around the ring muscle up execution with pairings of movements to build their limiters. So I look at it as two steps, right? And I said an ideal world because as we know, it can take a long fucking time to get certain people to a certain level with certain movements, right? Some people can be quick adapters with some stuff and be really slow adapters with other movements and other dynamic contractions. Now, we don't always have all the time in the world if we're against a clock within inside the time frame of the sport of CrossFit, right? So if I don't have all the time in the world, I'm trying to get them on that soul movement as close as I possibly can to where they need to be. And if they come up and if we're not quite there yet, but I know from a time perspective how much time I need now to focus on that movement with their limiters, whether that's complementary fatigue or contrasting fatigue, then from there, I need to get them more efficient at completing reps under fatigue, whether it's fatigue from various dynamic contractions or whether it's just fatigue from the system itself and being too tired, right? Whether it's muscular endurance or physiological endurance. So that's how I look at it. And I kind of hope that answers your question, but I look at it like strength to strength speed. I need to first build strength with inside the athlete before I try to apply strength speed to their programming, right? Like if they can't if they can't front squat for shit, it doesn't matter how much work I do in a clean. At some point, their clean is gonna be limited by their strength. If I spend too much time on pure strength, at some point I'm gonna lose their ability to successfully execute the clean with that speed and aggression that is needed. So it's kind of walking that fine line from a mixed modal standpoint as well, for me.
Got it. So, in short question is, when you're writing a workout, though, are you mainly looking at one movement and trying to build up that movement, or is a lot of time or is there just the same amount of time where you're thinking about just maybe making it where you think about all three movements? So like for example, you said like you bring it through all its things and then you're focusing on it from like a limiter standpoint. So if that's like with pressing components, right? Like you're still thinking about the ring muscle up in that setting versus like thinking about the workout as a whole. Like of course you're thinking about what it's paired with and why it's paired with, but in terms of sets and reps, is it still built around the muscle up?
If that's the primary focus inside that training block, yes.
Got it.
Yes.
Got it.
Now, some athletes, and you and I talk about this a lot, some athletes are at this functional ceiling where we have that realization that we need like 2 or 3 years to really get this ceiling elevated. So at that point, it's almost gonna be wasted time from a sport perspective to solely focus on that because it's gonna pull from other things. Instances like that, then I'm gonna do a little bit more focus on all the movements and getting them better and faster with inside various dynamic contractions as it relates to differing demands with inside the sport. Task priority, time priority, big sets that they can hold as quick as possible, high heart rate work, being able to transition quicker. Then it turns more into the craftsmanship of the sport and being able to backtrack in and out of the touch points of the season to get some blocks in of raising that ceiling to make them more efficient and better.
Cool. I like that. Beautiful, man. Beautiful. I guess last question, although I know a lot will go into it, is just like, how do you determine your rest for your athletes? Like if you're doing multiple sets, how long should they be resting? Does it change from week to week, or, how do you look at that?
I want you to answer this one too. But for me, how I determine the rest time for my athletes comes down to, again, not to sound like a broken record, but the demand of what I'm trying to get them to accomplish, right? And if I'm trying to make it more an aerobic workout, but I'm adding rest time in there, the rest time is going to be shorter because I know the intensity is going to be lower. It is an inverse relationship between intensity and volume. The more intense someone is, the longer rest time they need. The lower intense, the shorter rest time. But you are going to play those nodes like an equalizer where I'm going to be trying to elevate that intensity while slowly and strategically lowering the volume of rest time overall. Why? Because the name of this game is to be able to go faster longer, right? So you have to get them the ability to do that. So in the early stages, I play that inverse relationship of it's more intense, to be more rest, less intense, shorter rest. But as we progress through the season, I'm trying to get them to operate at those higher heart rates, those more intense sessions with less and less and less rest time to allow them to be able to operate faster and build the capacity there. What about you?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And looking at intensity from different types of standpoints, whether it's like energy system or even muscularly, right? Like, hey, I want you to be able to do 10 unbroken ring muscle ups in isolation, and you're going every 4 minutes for 3 sets. Like, slowly bringing down that time is going to make it more challenging. Similarly, if you're doing row 500s at a certain pace and going from 90 seconds of rest to 60 seconds of rest, eventually that's also going to become more challenging. But that's exactly how I look at it, and just slowly determining my rest. Like, what do I need? How much rest do they need to be able to accomplish this? Okay, can I take rest away, and can they still do it? And that's how I look at it a lot of the times.
I love it. Great stuff, man. A lot of value in this talk.
I hope so. So. All right, guys, that's going to wrap it up here. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you have any questions, always shoot us a message on Instagram, and we'll be happy to answer for you guys on here. Until next time.
Until next time.